August 1st, 1944. Avranches, France. General Oberst Günther von Kluge stared at the operational map in his headquarters with the growing realization that something impossible was happening. The American breakout from Normandy wasn't following any recognizable doctrine. The movements weren't methodical or cautious. They weren't consolidating gains or protecting flanks. Instead, American armored columns were racing south and east in multiple diverging spearheads, bypassing German strongpoints, ignoring their exposed flanks, driving deep into the German rear with a speed and audacity that seemed reckless. It looked exactly like a German Blitzkrieg operation. "They're using our own tactics," von Kluge remarked to his operations officer, his voice mixing disbelief with grudging respect. Schwerpunkt, rapid penetration, exploitation in depth, operational tempo. The Americans are conducting Bewegungskrieg. When did they learn this? What von Kluge was witnessing was the culmination of 3 years of institutional learning, as the U.S. Army systematically studied German operational doctrine, adapted it to American strengths, and then executed it with industrial-scale resources that made the original German version look modest by comparison. The student had learned from the master, then surpassed him by applying unlimited material capacity to perfected technique. This is the story of how American forces absorbed, adapted, and ultimately perfected the operational warfare that Germany had pioneered, turning the Wehrmacht's own doctrine into the instrument of its destruction. The German Revolution in operational warfare began in the aftermath of World War I. German military theorists, analyzing their defeat, concluded that future wars couldn't be won through attrition. Germany lacked the population and industrial capacity to outlast coalition enemies. Victory required operational innovation, defeating enemy forces through maneuver and speed rather than firepower and mass. The doctrine that emerged became known as Bewegungskrieg, maneuver warfare, or more popularly, Blitzkrieg. The core concepts were revolutionary. Concentrate overwhelming force at a single point, Schwerpunkt, achieve breakthrough, then exploit rapidly into the enemy rear before they could establish new defensive lines. Speed and shock replaced methodical advance. Armored forces didn't support infantry. They became independent operational formations capable of deep penetration. The key innovation was operational tempo. Traditional military thinking assumed advancing forces would pause to consolidate, regroup, and prepare for counterattacks. German doctrine demanded continuous movement, accepting risk to maintain momentum. The goal wasn't to destroy enemy forces in place, but to bypass them, collapse their command structure, and create psychological shock through rapid operational maneuver. Poland, France, and the early Soviet campaigns demonstrated the doctrine's devastating effectiveness. German panzer divisions could advance 50 miles in a day, penetrating far beyond infantry support, creating pockets of encircled enemy forces, and collapsing defensive lines before they could be properly established. The speed was unprecedented and seemingly unstoppable. The United States Army that entered World War II was doctrinally decades behind. American armored doctrine in 1942 emphasized supporting infantry attacks, not independent operations. Tanks were seen as mobile pillboxes, artillery as preparation for infantry assault. The idea of armored divisions operating independently, far from infantry support, with exposed flanks and extended supply lines, was considered reckless by American doctrine. The disaster at Kasserine Pass in February 1943 provided a brutal education. German forces under Rommel executed a textbook Bewegungskrieg operation, concentrating armor at an unexpected point, achieving breakthrough and routing American forces through rapid exploitation. American units trained in methodical warfare were psychologically unprepared for the speed and violence of German operational maneuver. Major General Lloyd Fredendall, commanding 2nd Corps, had positioned his forces according to standard defensive doctrine: strong points, prepared positions, interlocking fires. Rommel's panzers simply bypassed the strong points, drove through gaps, and attacked from unexpected directions. American forces found themselves fighting in all directions simultaneously. Their carefully prepared defenses rendered irrelevant by enemy forces operating in their rear. The defeat was catastrophic, but educational. General Eisenhower, assessing the failure, recognized that tactical competence wasn't enough. American forces needed to understand operational warfare, not just how to fight battles, but how to fight campaigns. He began a systematic program to study German doctrine and adapt it to American capabilities. The officer Eisenhower chose to lead this transformation was George S. Patton, whose aggressive temperament and intellectual curiosity made him ideal for learning and implementing German-style operational warfare. Patton had studied German armored doctrine extensively, reading everything available about panzer operations. He understood that American material superiority would be decisive only if American operations could match German tempo and audacity. Patton's training program in Morocco after Kasserine emphasized speed, initiative, and operational depth. He forced commanders to think beyond the immediate battle, to plan in terms of campaigns rather than engagements. He emphasized maintaining momentum regardless of casualties or risks. Most radically, he taught American commanders to accept exposed flanks and extended supply lines as necessary features of mobile warfare. "The enemy doesn't attack your flanks," Patton told his officers, paraphrasing German doctrine. "They don't have time if you're moving fast enough. By the time they organize an attack on your flank, you're already somewhere else. Speed is security. Momentum is protection. Stopping is what gets you killed." This was pure German operational thinking, adapted to American circumstances. But Patton added something the Germans lacked: absolute faith in American logistics. German Bewegungskrieg accepted that spearheads would outrun supplies, creating periodic pauses. Patton's version assumed American logistics could maintain any pace combat units could achieve. This single difference would eventually make American operational warfare more sustainable than the German original. The Sicily campaign in July 1943 provided the first test of adapted German doctrine. Patton's 7th Army conducted a rapid advance across western Sicily that deliberately mimicked German operational methods. Instead of methodically clearing territory, American forces identified the main objective, Palermo, concentrated force, achieved breakthrough, and exploited rapidly regardless of bypassed enemy forces. The advance covered 100 miles in 4 days, a pace unprecedented for American forces. German commanders observing the operation noted the resemblance to their own methods. Italian units found themselves bypassed and encircled by American armor operating in their rear. The psychological impact mirrored what German operations had achieved in 1940. Defending forces lost cohesion, not through destruction but through operational dislocation. But Sicily also revealed American advantages. When German forces executed counterattacks against Patton's exposed flanks, they encountered American firepower that exceeded anything in German experience. Artillery concentrations, naval gunfire, and airstrikes combined to shatter counterattacks before they developed. The Americans were learning to compensate for operational risk through overwhelming supporting fires. General Major Eberhard Roth, commanding the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division in Sicily, reported the evolution in American tactics. "The Americans are no longer fighting methodically. They advance like our panzer divisions, accepting risk and maintaining tempo. But when we counterattack their exposed flanks, our standard response to overextended advances, we encounter firepower that makes counterattacks suicidal. They have learned our methods and added resources we cannot match." The Italian campaign provided more practice in operational warfare, though the mountainous terrain limited opportunities for large-scale maneuver. American commanders learned to identify opportunities for Bewegungskrieg, even in restrictive terrain. The race to Messina, the end runs at Anzio, the breakouts from the Gustav Line, all demonstrated growing American proficiency in identifying Schwerpunkt, achieving breakthrough, and exploiting rapidly. More significantly, American commanders were learning to think operationally rather than tactically. They began planning not just how to win the current battle, but how to position forces for subsequent operations. This operational depth of thinking, planning 3 or 4 moves ahead, was characteristic of German command culture and alien to American tradition. Its adoption marked a fundamental shift in American military thinking. By the time of the Normandy invasion in June 1944, the U.S. Army possessed both theoretical understanding of German operational doctrine and practical experience in its application. What they hadn't yet demonstrated was the ability to conduct Bewegungskrieg at scale, with multiple corps operating in coordination across a broad front. The breakout from Normandy would provide that test. The hedgerow fighting in June and July 1944 appeared to validate German expectations that Americans would fight methodically. The bocage terrain channeled attacks, negated mobility advantages, and forced costly frontal assaults. German commanders, observing American operations, concluded that American doctrine remained essentially attritional, despite some evolution toward maneuver. What German intelligence failed to detect was that American commanders were deliberately accepting slow progress in most sectors to build up overwhelming force for a single decisive breakthrough. This was classic Schwerpunkt thinking, economy of force across most of the front to enable concentration at the decisive point. The Americans were applying German operational principles at a scale Germans had never attempted. Operation Cobra, launched on July 25, 1944, demonstrated how completely American commanders had absorbed German doctrine. The operation began with massive bombardment to create a narrow breach in German lines, using firepower to achieve what German operations achieved through surprise and speed. But once the breach was created, the exploitation phase followed German doctrine precisely. 7th Corps, led by Major General J. Lawton Collins, concentrated 3 armored divisions at the breakthrough point. Once through German lines, these divisions didn't consolidate or widen the breach. They drove south in 3 parallel columns, maintaining maximum speed, bypassing German strong points, and racing for operational objectives 40 miles distant. The resemblance to German panzer operations was precise and deliberate. General der Panzertruppen Fritz Bayerlein, commanding Panzerlehr Division in the path of the American breakthrough, recognized immediately what was happening. This is not the American method we faced in Normandy. This is our method. They have concentrated at one point, broken through, and are now exploiting in depth without pause. Our counterattack positions are being bypassed. Our supply lines are being cut. This is how we defeated France. Now, they are using it against us. The exploitation phase of Cobra demonstrated American advantages when combining German doctrine with American resources. German panzer divisions had typically operated as single division spearheads due to limited armored forces. The Americans fielded multiple armored divisions simultaneously, creating breakthrough capabilities Germans could never match in scale. More significantly, American armored divisions possessed organic artillery, engineer support, and supply capacity that allowed sustained operations. German panzer divisions often outran their artillery support and supply trains. American armored divisions traveled with their support, maintaining combined arms capability throughout the exploitation phase. The advance from Avranches beginning July 31st showcased operational warfare perfected. Patton's Third Army, activated for the exploitation phase, conducted a multi-corps maneuver that sent armored columns racing in 3 directions simultaneously: south into Brittany, east toward Paris, and southeast toward the Loire. The operation deliberately created maximum confusion and dislocation in German rear areas. This was Bewegungskrieg at unprecedented scale, where German operations typically involved a single panzer corps. Patton was operating with 3 full corps, conducting simultaneous deep penetrations. The headquarters coordination required to manage this complexity exceeded anything Germans had attempted. American staff work, communications, and logistics enabled operational warfare at a scale that made German operations look modest. German commanders watching the American breakout experienced cognitive dissonance. The operations were textbook German doctrine, but executed with resources and scale that seemed impossible. Multiple American armored divisions operating simultaneously in the German rear, all fully supplied, all advancing 30 to 40 miles daily, all coordinated through radio networks. It was Bewegungskrieg, without the limitations that had constrained German operations. Von Kluge, commanding all German forces in the West, attempted to organize the traditional German response to breakthrough, counterattack the flanks of the penetration. He concentrated what armored forces remained and ordered an attack at Mortain, designed to cut the American spearhead and restore the front line. It was the doctrinally correct response, the same tactic that had defeated Allied breakthroughs previously. The Mortain counterattack, launched August 7th, demonstrated why American operational warfare had surpassed its German inspiration. Von Kluge's panzers attacked the base of the American penetration, expecting to sever the spearhead from its logistics. Instead, they encountered American forces positioned and waiting. Allied intelligence had detected German preparations, and American commanders had positioned reserves specifically to defeat the counterattack. More significantly, the Germans encountered firepower that made maneuver impossible. Allied air power, enjoying complete air superiority, struck German armor concentrations continuously. American artillery, pre-positioned based on intelligence, delivered devastating fires on approach routes. The Germans lost 100 tanks in 48 hours without achieving their objectives. The counterattack that should have severed the American penetration instead consumed Germany's last mobile reserves. The failure at Mortain demonstrated a crucial difference between German and American operational warfare. German doctrine assumed that enemy forces would need time to respond to rapid maneuver, creating windows of opportunity. American forces with superior intelligence and communications could respond in real time, positioning forces to counter German moves before they developed. Patton's exploitation from Avranches proceeded without pause. By August 10th, Third Army had advanced over 100 miles from the breakthrough point, captured key objectives across Brittany, and positioned forces threatening Paris. The speed exceeded even German advances in 1940. The scale, multiple corps in continuous operation, was unprecedented. What made this possible was logistics that German forces had never possessed. The famous Red Ball Express and other supply operations delivered 12,000 tons of supplies daily to advancing forces. Fuel trucks operated in continuous shuttles. Ammunition was pre-positioned along likely advance routes. The logistical tail moved almost as fast as combat spearheads. German commanders, accustomed to their own logistics limitations, couldn't comprehend American supply operations. German panzer operations typically culminated after 3 to 5 days as fuel ran out. American operations continued for weeks. The Americans had taken German operational doctrine and removed its primary limiting factor: supply sustainability. The encirclement of German forces in the Falaise pocket demonstrated American operational warfare functioning as Germans had envisioned but never fully achieved. American forces advancing from the south and Canadian forces pushing from the north created a classic Kesselschlacht, cauldron battle, encircling German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army. This was precisely the type of operation German doctrine envisioned. Use rapid maneuver to create encirclement, trap enemy forces, and destroy them without costly direct assault. The execution was textbook Bewegungskrieg. The scale, 2 entire German armies encircled, exceeded anything Germany had achieved against Western armies. Von Kluge, trapped in the pocket he had failed to prevent, recognized the irony in his final message before being relieved. The enemy is conducting operational maneuver of the type we developed and perfected. They execute it with greater resources, better intelligence, and superior logistics. We created the doctrine. They perfected it. Our own methods are being used to destroy us. The race across France in August 1944 was German Blitzkrieg doctrine, executed at American scale. Multiple American armies advanced simultaneously, each conducting independent operations but coordinated at theater level. The Rhine was reached in weeks, Paris liberated, Belgium freed, The advance covered more distance in 1 month than German forces had covered in their 1940 campaign. German defensive efforts during the advance were hamstrung by American adoption of German tempo. Traditional defense assumes you can identify the enemy's operational objectives, position forces to defend them, and force the enemy to attack prepared positions. American operations moved too fast for this paradigm. By the time German forces identified American objectives and moved to defend them, American forces were already there or had shifted to new objectives. General Lieutenant Hans Speidel, operations officer for Army Group B, described the impossible defensive problem. We cannot defend against this. We identify their objective. They are already there. We position forces to block them. They bypass our positions. We prepare counterattacks. They have already advanced beyond our strike range. They have taken our operational doctrine and applied resources that make it unstoppable. The pursuit across France revealed another American innovation. They had mechanized the exploitation phase beyond German achievements. German panzer operations typically involved armored spearheads, followed by foot-mobile infantry days behind. American operations used trucks to move infantry in proximity to armor, maintaining combined arms capability throughout the advance. This mechanization of the entire force, not just armored spearheads, meant American operations didn't create the gaps between armor and infantry that had often stalled German advances. When American armor encountered resistance requiring infantry support, infantry arrived hours later, not days. The entire force moved at operational tempo, not just the armored elements. The supply situation during the pursuit demonstrated American logistical capabilities that Germans found incomprehensible. Patton's Third Army, operating 400 miles from Normandy beachheads, consumed 400,000 gallons of fuel daily. This exceeded the total fuel consumption of entire German army groups. Yet American supply operations maintained this consumption for weeks. The logistics enabling this sustained operational warfare required industrial capacity and organizational skill that exceeded military operations in complexity. Truck drivers operating in continuous relays, fuel depots established and abandoned as the advance continued, maintenance units keeping thousands of vehicles operational. The logistical achievement enabling American operational warfare was itself a form of military revolution. When supply lines finally did stretch to breaking in September 1944, forcing operational pauses, German commanders felt vindicated. Their operations have culminated as ours always did, noted General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt. Extended supply lines create vulnerability. They will pause, consolidate, and resume methodical operations. The movement warfare phase is ending. This assessment was premature. The Americans weren't abandoning operational warfare. They were industrializing it. The supply pause was used to establish forward logistics bases, extend pipeline networks, and position supplies for resumed operations. When American forces resumed operations in November, the logistics infrastructure had been advanced 300 miles, allowing sustained operations at tempo Germans considered unsustainable. The Ardennes offensive in December 1944 demonstrated how completely the operational warfare dynamic had reversed. Germany's last major offensive employed classic Belegungskrieg doctrine: concentrate forces secretly, achieve surprise breakthrough, exploit rapidly to operational objectives, accept risk to maintain momentum. It was executed competently using proven German methods. The American response, however, demonstrated that they had absorbed not just German offensive doctrine, but defensive doctrine as well. American forces conducted mobile defense, trading space for time, channeling German advances into kill zones, positioning mobile reserves for counterattack. These were all German defensive techniques, learned and adapted. More significantly, the American counteroffensive in January 1945 employed operational warfare that exceeded German capabilities even at their peak. Multiple corps attacked simultaneously from different directions, converging on the German salient. The coordination required to manage this complex multi-axis operation while maintaining supply to all attacking forces demonstrated operational skill that surpassed German achievements. By early 1945, German commanders openly acknowledged that American operational warfare had evolved beyond its German origins. The Rhine crossings in March demonstrated this evolution. multiple crossings at different points, immediate exploitation from each bridgehead, rapid encirclement of defending forces. This was Bewegungskrieg, perfected through American resources and organizational capacity. The encirclement of the Ruhr pocket employed Schwerpunkt, exploitation, and encirclement on a scale Germans had never achieved. Two entire American armies conducted converging operations, met 50 miles behind German lines, and trapped over 300,000 German troops. The operation was conceived, planned, and executed in 3 weeks. Operational tempo at theater scale. General Feldmarschall model, trapped in the Ruhr, provided perhaps the most concise assessment of how American operational warfare had evolved. They learned our methods, studied our doctrine, practiced our techniques. Then they applied American industrial capacity, logistics, and firepower. They perfected what we pioneered. We taught them maneuver warfare. They added the resources to make it unstoppable. We created a doctrine designed to compensate for material inferiority. They took that doctrine and applied it with material superiority. The result is warfare at a scale and speed we never imagined possible. The final advance across Germany demonstrated operational warfare, functioning at a level the German pioneers had envisioned but never achieved. American armies advanced on multiple axes, coordinated through radio networks, supplied by mechanized logistics, supported by air forces operating as flying artillery. The tempo was relentless, the scale was continental, the complexity exceeded anything attempted in military history. German forces defending with skill and determination found themselves operationally outmaneuvered despite tactical competence. American forces didn't attack German strongpoints, they bypassed them. They didn't fight for cities, they seized crossroads behind them. They didn't destroy German units, they encircled them and moved on, leaving follow-on forces to process surrenders. This was Bewegungskrieg perfected. Rapid movement, operational depth, acceptance of risk, maintenance of tempo, regardless of tactical situation. Every principle of German operational doctrine was being executed by American forces with a competence and scale that exceeded the original. In prisoner interrogations in 1945, senior German officers repeatedly returned to the theme of American adoption of German doctrine. General Oberst Alfred Jodl, chief of the Wehrmacht operations staff, provided the most comprehensive assessment. The Americans entered the war with outdated doctrine emphasizing methodical operations and overwhelming firepower. They learned quickly. By 1944, they were executing operational warfare, using our principles of Schwerpunkt, rapid exploitation, and deep penetration. But they added capabilities we never possessed. Logistics that could sustain operations indefinitely, firepower that could compensate for operational risk, intelligence that provided real-time awareness, and industrial capacity that allowed simultaneous operations on multiple axes. We developed Bewegungskrieg to compensate for material inferiority, to achieve victory through superior operational skill despite fewer resources. The Americans studied our methods and applied them with superior resources. They created operational warfare without the limitations that constrained German operations. The result was unstoppable. The irony is complete. We were defeated by our own doctrine, perfected by an enemy with the industrial capacity to execute it without compromise. They learned from us, then surpassed us by removing the resource constraints that limited German operations. We taught them how to fight. They showed us what those methods could achieve with unlimited resources. The post-war U.S. Army institutionalized the operational warfare learned during World War II. The doctrine of air-land battle, developed in the 1980s, had direct lineage to German Bewegungskrieg as adapted and perfected by American forces in 1944 to 45. The emphasis on operational tempo, deep operations, and exploitation remains central to American military thinking. The transformation from the cautious, methodical American Army of 1942 to the operationally sophisticated force of 1945 represented one of history's most remarkable institutional learning achievements. In 3 years, American forces studied, absorbed, adapted, and ultimately perfected operational warfare doctrine that had taken Germany decades to develop. The key to this achievement wasn't just learning German methods, but understanding their underlying principles and adapting them to American strengths. American commanders recognized that Bewegungskrieg wasn't simply aggressive tactics. It was an operational philosophy emphasizing speed, initiative, and exploitation. Once they understood the principles, they could apply American advantages: superior logistics, overwhelming firepower, excellent intelligence, and industrial capacity. The Germans had developed operational warfare as a solution to a specific problem: how to win decisively, despite material inferiority. The Americans took that solution and applied it to a different problem: how to maximize the effect of material superiority. The result was operational warfare at a scale and sustainability the German pioneers never imagined. When von Kluge stood at his map in August 1944, watching American forces execute textbook Bewegungskrieg operations, he was witnessing the completion of a learning cycle. The Americans had been poor students in North Africa, learning through painful defeats. They had been adequate students in Sicily and Italy, achieving competence through practice. By France, they had become masters, surpassing their teachers. The American forces racing across France in 1944 weren't imitating German tactics. They were executing German operational doctrine with American characteristics. The principles were German: Schwerpunkt, exploitation, tempo, depth. The execution was distinctly American: multiple simultaneous operations, lavish logistics, overwhelming firepower, perfect coordination. German generals couldn't believe the Americans were using their own strategy because they couldn't comprehend that strategy functioning without the resource constraints that had shaped German operational thinking. They had developed Bewegungskrieg as elegant efficiency, achieving maximum results with minimum resources. Americans had transformed it into overwhelming power, applying unlimited resources to perfected techniques. The student had learned from the master, then demonstrated what the master's methods could achieve when resources were unlimited, logistics were guaranteed, and industrial capacity could support any operational concept. The Americans hadn't just copied German doctrine, they had perfected it, industrialized it, and used it to destroy the army that created it. In the end, German generals didn't just face military defeat, they faced the intellectual humiliation of watching their own operational innovations executed better by an enemy they had dismissed as tactically incompetent. The Americans had proven that with sufficient resources and organizational capacity, even the most sophisticated military doctrine could be learned, adapted, and perfected in just 3 years of warfare. The Americans had used German strategy to defeat Germany, and that, more than any tactical defeat, demonstrated how completely the balance of military capability had shifted. The nation that pioneered modern operational warfare had been destroyed by an enemy who learned their methods, adapted them to different strengths, and executed them at a scale that made the original version obsolete.